one who is already attending. Nice that you're here.
We were giving you a bit of a spoiler about the trilogues, but we'll keep the suspense going.
Okay, it's 1:15, so we are starting. Hello, everyone. Yeah, we just have a talk about the climate law, the negotiations that happened today, the right to a healthy climate, access to justice. And I'm looking forward to this new format of like just chit-chatting on Zoom. And you can, of course, raise your hand if you want to say something, or can type something in the chat or in the question function. And yeah, today with me is Harriet Mackaill-Hill. I hope I pronounced it right. She's working with the Climate Action Network of Europe on the European climate law, and especially on climate litigation and the increase of the EU's ambition, which is absolutely necessary and important. So we're looking forward to discuss this with you today, Harriet. Yeah, I'm Michael Bloss. I'm the shadow from the Greens for the climate law, meaning that I'm in the negotiation team of the European Parliament on the climate law. And as you probably know, today we had the third round of negotiations on this law. As you probably also know, the first and the second round, they were basically formal, and where, well, everyone explained a little bit their position, which was also open, readable on the internet, and then basically it stopped. So today we had a little bit of a longer discussion of 3 hours, but yeah, I would say we did not go very far, especially on the most important points, which is the question of the climate target for 2030. The council is really blocking any kind of conversation, which is not really helpful, because we need to be very fast in finalizing this. And as you know, the European Parliament side is that we want to have a gross 60% cut of CO2 emission until 2030, and the council side is they want to have a net 55%. So also calculating things into it. So there's quite some difference, and we really need to start talking about it, and we haven't, and that's unfortunate. And yeah, I think it will not work like this. We need to start discussing this, because that's negotiations. And yeah, there's other interesting things. I think there's a little bit of opening. Still a lot of uncertainty is the question of science and the European Council on Climate Change, where we want to have a scientific body that gives recommendations to policymakers, to the Commission, and the question of the 2040 target, and how we are going to set it, what kind of trajectory we have from 2030 to 2040, and how the greenhouse gas budget plays a role in that, because that's what the European Parliament said, that we want to have a greenhouse gas budget. That's the most precise, most scientific thing, how we measure climate politics. But yes, that's just for the introduction. Maybe, Harriet, you also want to just comment a little bit on the in general on the climate law, and then we can go a little bit more deeper into the debate about access to justice and why that's so important.
Thanks a lot, Michelle, and thanks a lot for the invitation. It's indeed pretty cool to have these little chit chats, and everybody can join and pop in and pop out. So we're part of the Brussels NGO community, and we're a member organization, and we have about 180 members across the EU, actually across Europe, because it's not only EU members. And as an organization, we fight for 65% emissions, much like the Greens. So we were very happy when the Parliament came forward with their 60%. However, the Council will obviously be very difficult on this. The aim for us, as it was at the beginning and as it was for the Commission of the Climate Law, was to enshrine these targets into law, which I think is a very good basis. It's a very good thing. Climate laws are fashionable all over, so it's great that the Commission got on board. However, now it's kind of developed into something else. I think with the Parliament, when we were working on the amendments, we realized the potential and the opportunity that this climate law kind of represented. And now I think we want to see it as a science-based climate law. We can see it all over. It's in all of the Commission's legislation, member states. Science is extremely clear of what is happening right now in terms of climate change. It's extremely clear of what we have to do. And there are measures out there of telling us how to do it. So I think this climate law really represents a possibility of increasing accountability of EU bodies, but also of member states. And I think we can see the possibility of including some of these tools into this climate law. And one of them for us is obviously access to justice. Another tool there that I think might be very interesting, and that there might be some possibilities and openings that we can foresee on the council side, is this kind of independent advisory body. That's I think what we kind of thought was interesting about the trilogue today, in the sense that not, as Misha said, not a lot of steps were taken to go forward. But this advisory body was put into a category of possibilities, of possible openings among member states. And for us, that's great news, because that on the one hand would allow some kind of guidance as to is the Commission doing the right things in terms of bringing us towards a climate neutrality in 2050, or is it not? And if not, what can we do? So it's all around this accountability, and I think it can also guide the Commission in terms of targets, and that is essential, because targets right now, EU targets, the decisions on EU targets are taken behind closed doors, and that's a problem in a democracy in the 21st century. So I'll leave it there, and I'll hand back over to Misha.
Yeah, maybe we just discuss a little bit about the access to justice. I mean, altogether, it is, for me at least, like small steps in the direction of really realizing this right to a healthy environment and a right to a healthy climate. Which I believe is crucial to have it also in the 21st century. So yeah, we live in a climate crisis, so we need to also change the way we approach this kind of rights and individual rights. And in the climate law, the Parliament proposed something which is not going in as much as to say, look, there's another universal human right to a healthy environment. But basically what we say is that there is already the Aarhus conventions, so some international convention that gives people the possibility to have access to the juridical system for environmental matters. And we have, for instance, in the whole climate governance in the European Union, there is the member states, they have to come up with their national energy and climate plans, where they also, well, basically where they prescribe what is their climate and energy policy. And the concerned people of the public, but also NGOs, they should be able to participate in drawing up such a plan. And if they do not have this possibility, or if this possibility is taken away from them, then they should be able to go to court, because it's their right. So we try to advance this currently in the negotiations. Well, actually, we have to say until now, it's a little bit like with the 2030 target. The other side does not really debate it with us yet, and I think we really need to advance on it, and we need to debate it because it's quite important. But maybe Harriet, you're working on this a lot, so maybe you can explain the relevance of this access to justice also now.
So I think access to justice up until now has been considered as a very opaque and legal topic. Indeed, I'm not going to hide it. It's a very complicated topic. But there are actually, the basis of it is that you are an EU citizen. How is it not possible that you can challenge EU environmental law? So this law is legislation at EU level that is going to affect your everyday life. So today we already have communities of vulnerable communities to climate change that are already on the front lines of climate change. And by that, I mean that they're already feeling these impacts. So this can be drought, it can be rise of sea level, which would then contaminate natural water on an island, for example. And if you cannot actually get to a court to be able to challenge this legislation, it's impossible to call what we live in today a democracy. And further than that, what makes it even more frustrating, I would say, is that, as Michel was saying, this is something that has already been signed. We're not arriving with a new mandate and be like, look, guys, this is new. No, it's been signed by the EU and it should also be implemented at member state level. So I think if we go a little bit back to the trilogues, this today was called a bit of a no-go topic. Which is why I think we really, really have to increase pressure. And this pressure can also come from national levels. Oh, I have two Mishas online.
Yeah, somebody's like Zoom bombing us.
So yeah, I think the pressure also has to come from national level. And the aim of access to justice actually the aim would be for citizens to feel more engaged, for them to be able to actually question law that will apply to them. Yeah.
And we are advancing it, but we before we come to like all of the attendees, you can actually raise your hand. So there should be some kind of raise your hand button. And there's also some questions actually from one person in the question and answering tool. So you can also just write your question there. And I actually received beforehand some questions on Instagram. So I'm going to post them to all of you. Maybe we can also just like comment on them. And yeah, the first one is, how do we achieve a global access to justice in this regard? The second is access to justice, is it just like, what is it just possible? How can the EU know what is a right worth if no one checks it? So like, I mean, like, do you have this right, but like, is it, can you make it a reality? How can the EU Council block this access to justice? And will there be a veto right in for the climate involved? So that's a lot of questions already, and then we have even more in the question and answering box. So maybe go through it one for the achieve global access to justice. That's maybe like a tough question. The Aarhus Convention is a global convention, so it is there already on the international level. And I think what is really interesting, in the UN, there is actually the discussion about this right to a healthy environment. So this is advancing. Some countries are really behind this, especially those who are affected by the climate crisis. And next General Assembly, I heard there is possibly a resolution in the UN that then speaks about this and makes it more reality. And maybe Harriet, there is this question like, what is actually the value of this right? I mean, like, how if we would now do it as the Parliament wrote into the into the climate law, like, you know, like, is that something that is easily for me accessible or not? Do I have to pay a lawyer? And then so that does it make a difference for the normal person on the ground who who thinks that they can use it or not?
That's a very good question. And obviously this will depend on the state of rule of law per member state. I mean, I'm sorry to say that still today, it's not the same across member states. But let's say on a theoretical basis, what this amendment, what this provision in the climate law that the Parliament would put forward, it would mean that an individual or an NGO or both together could challenge the national energy and climate plans or the national long-term strategies. Now, this is very interesting. So it might sound, again, another opaque tool from the EU bubble, but these are actually very interesting because it kind of draws the roadmap of how a member state is going to get to 2050, basically, to climate neutrality. And a lot of member states, so member states were supposed to submit these last year. A lot of them were submitted, although with quite a bit of delay. What is interesting is that a lot of member states do not do enough, and the targets that they bring forward are far from enough to reach 2050 climate neutral. So this would allow so you and me and NGOs to challenge this in front of a national court. And when I say national court, this can also then come up to an EU level, because if you exhaust measures at a national level, you can then come to an EU court. So this is kind of a mechanism as well, let's not hide away from it, of keeping things at national level so there's not a massive invasion of EU level courts. But so it's not access to justice as a whole, because the EU level is not represented, as Michel was saying at the beginning, in this provision, but it would already be very good for national level measures.
And maybe the next question is like, why can the EU Council just block this? Yes, they can, unfortunately. Actually, it's a bit sad to see that sometimes the nature of these negotiations, I'm also new to this, but it's really like, now we don't want that, now what you give us this, and it's not really that you kind of think, okay, we are in a maybe new situation and we are in this climate crisis, how can we change things in order to create an architecture that fits to this new world? But yeah, of course, like when the member states say, no, we don't want that because we do not want that our citizens have so easy access to justice, then they can block it. And the trick of the European level is that we are finding a compromise, and that's what we try to do. I think, yeah, finding a compromise also means finding the best thing for the people, and I hope means that like people will also go out and say, look, I think we need that, we want that. This is what you should be doing to their governments, so that it's not only like, you know, governments do something in Brussels and, as Harriet just said, like it's behind closed doors and no one knows. But I want to also with this format try to make it a bit more public what we are discussing there in the council, because it's of the concern for everyone, citizens that are citizens of the EU and of member states, and we should be representing them. But if member states say no and we do not come to a conclusion, then we don't get it.
But
Will there be a veto?
I could just jump in there, because that sounds very negative. And I think it would be a real shame and a bit of a disaster, if we're being completely honest, if it doesn't go through in the climate law. But also this whole amendment and law building is a great process to air topics like these. So even if we don't get it into this climate law, it's a topic that would have been brought to the forefront of the climate debate, and that will have been kind of made bigger by all the work that the Parliament has put into it, by even member states. Even if they don't agree to it, they have to discuss it. So it's something that's brought forward. So even if it doesn't get in, it would already be a good thing that it was brought in the amendments for is discussed. Yeah.
Okay, that's a more positive outlook. That's great. Will there be a veto right for the climate involved? No. I mean, if it's well, I mean, what could it mean? I'm not so sure what that means, but in a sense of a veto right for the climate, I know it just from, for instance, that you have like some people demand that there will be like the scientific council, and the scientific council could veto, for instance, laws that would, you know, like be like worsening the climate crisis or so. And that's not what we are talking about. Also, with in terms of access to justice, it would be great, for instance, that like in the Netherlands, citizens can just go to court against some kind of legislation and say, look, this is completely not in line with what we have been signing in the Paris Agreement. So this legislation should not exist. It's kind of unconstitutional, but it's also, we are not there yet in terms of the strengths of this law. But possibly, I think, I mean, that's a bit of a different debate, but I think also, like, yeah, the climate protection should be part of national constitutions. So it actually has this kind of rank in terms of that. If there is some laws that are really worsening the climate crisis, then they could be ruled unconstitutional. That was the questions that I got on Instagram. Now we have a lot of people from who actually ask questions here. Can you shortlist the main points of the law? Measurement of CO2 is crucial. Is it already on national level under practice? CO2 measurement in municipalities follows a different political real-life process than nationality. So there's a lot of questions about how do we actually measure, if I understand it correct, CO2 emissions. Then Ursula is asking, is the target 2030 emissions not set in stone yet after the 11th December Council? There's a more general question. The progress that has been made during trialogue. Okay, I'm trying to maybe just the short main points of the law. Yeah, well, which is climate neutrality in 2050, also on member state level or not. That's what we're discussing. It's the question how the CO2 emission reduction until 2030. It's a scientific body to give recommendations to the Commission. It's a greenhouse gas budget. It's the access to justice. It's the end of fossil fuel subsidies. And a lot of things more, but so it's actually quite big. And then there's a lot of questions about measurement of CO2. That's not so much discussed. I think this is actually something that there is already some good measurements in place, and the UN, well, on the kind of level of the Paris Agreement, there is a discussion of how we measure CO2 emissions. Then Ursula is asking this question, so is the 2030 emissions target not set in stone? And that's, thank you very much, because that's a very important question. No, it's not. It's not set in stone. Even though member states, or like the heads of state, they basically say, look, it's us heads of state and we decide everything, and now it's done. But no, actually we have a European democracy, and this is going to be written in a law. And when there is a law, it's actually the parliaments, the representatives and the elected members of the parliament that have to make this decision. And we as the parliament said, we want to have 60%. Now the member states, they say 55%, and now we have to negotiate. Even though the member states do not want to negotiate that, because they said, no, we said we want to have this. But this is, well, fortunately, actually not how it's done. Basically, you need to have both institutions agreeing, parliament and member states, and we are not agreeing, we are in disagreement. We disagree with this not ambitious conservative target of the council, and therefore we will fight for higher target. Even though a lot of journalists actually also write, okay, this is now the new EU climate target, but no, that's not the case. New climate target is currently debated and negotiated, and we hope to find a compromise, but currently council is blocking any debate. And Anna, well, no, someone else is asking, so what's the point of the progress during today's trilogue? What has been achieved? And again, yeah, it's a little bit, I mean, we achieve a little bit of progress on you know, small things, this and that. I cannot like now say like where the exact progress is, but you know, like on some minor details on adaptation and maybe the review clause or so. But the big elephant in the room is the 2030 climate target and the question of what do we understand with climate neutrality? Is it on member state level or not? And all of these things are basically being blocked and they're not negotiated. And this is really frustrating because we really need to make progress fast on this. So that's it. Then now someone is asking, would the climate law and the decision on access to justice influence the current climate litigation cases like the People's Climate case? Harriet, maybe you want to do this one.
Yeah, I'll take that one. And then there's another one that I'll take on ARIS. So no. Short answer to that is no, in the sense that the People's Climate case is something that's happening at EU level. So the People's Climate case, for those that do not know, it's a group of 7 families that took the EU bodies to court on the fact that they were not doing enough in terms of EU ambition. So it's quite a big case in the sense that they were asking they're asking on the grounds of fundamental right abuse. So that would be making the link between fundamental rights and climate, which has still not been made, at least in front of the ECJ. European Court of Justice, that is. And so what would happen in the climate law is at national level. So that would be in front of national courts, and that would enable NGOs and citizens to challenge those national plans and those national long-term strategies. So for the moment, what's happening under the climate law will not influence anything at EU level. But now that we're talking about EU level, as some of you may have heard, there is another procedure that that the Commission was actually asking member states to confuse with what's happening in the climate law. So there's 2 procedures that are happening on access to justice in parallel. So there's access to justice, which is under the climate law, which deals with what I've just mentioned, access to justice at national level for NGOs and citizens. In parallel, there's a review of the ARIS regulation, which is the implementation at EU level of the ARIS Convention that Misha was talking about at the beginning, which is an international law convention on access to justice that the EU decided to adopt and sign. And at the same time, this is happening, and that's more for access to justice at EU level. So there is actually no exact link between the 2 processes that are happening at the same time. They are very different, and they will allow for very different results. One thing that I think is good to mention, though, is that access to justice, the way it's put in the European Parliament amendments, is something that the Commission would agree with, because it's something that they wrote themselves in a communication that came out just before Christmas. So they would agree on kind of sectoral access to justice to be put in different directives. So we might be able to get the Commission on our side for this, but the last ones to convince are still the member states.
Actually, maybe Harry, can you just explain a little bit about the different People's Climate cases that you're also working on? What are they? Who is that? You know, what stages are these cases in?
So yeah, good idea. So we're currently working on 2. We've been working on one, which is the People's Climate case, the PCC. We've been working on that one for about 3 years. We're still in front of the European Court of Justice, and we still have not been able to plead on merits. So it means that everything that we have against EU bodies for not doing enough in terms of ambition, all our arguments have not been able to be heard yet, because the court is not giving us access to justice, as we call it. They're not giving us a standing in front of the court. They say that we do not qualify to come in front of the court, which is the whole inherent problem of access to justice, that people, NGOs, do not qualify to actually have their arguments heard in front of a court. So I have to admit we're rather pessimistic as to the outcome of the People's Climate case right now. But it all started 3 years ago when families from 7 countries got together. So it's Kenya, Romania, Italy, Portugal, Germany, and I've forgotten one. And Denmark. The essence of the case, though, is that what all these people, all these communities have in common is their vulnerability to climate change and the fact that they are already now feeling these effects, as I mentioned a little bit before. So it's the effects of increase in temperature, which leads to drought. So we have a lavender farmer in France, another country that I forgot, that at the moment, so he's grown lavender for generations through his family in Provence, and he's seeing his business completely decline from the difference from the massive climate change. We have farmers in Portugal and Italy. One of them is a beekeeper. So I suppose you've heard a lot about the problems that the bee communities are having at the moment in surviving, basically, and how much bees bring to us in terms of what they do in kind of pollination. And then, so that's the People's Climate Case. Each of these individual families came together to tell the EU bodies that they are not doing enough and that they are already feeling these effects. And if the EU does not do anything, there'll be no more hope. And the link, and what the People's Climate Case was trying to do was make this link between fundamental rights and climate, which brings me to the second case, which is a much more recent case, which is the case of the Portuguese children. And that case has been brought against not only all EU member states, but also others such as Ukraine, Russia, Turkey, Norway. And these here, it's very interesting in the sense that, so there are two different courts. So there's the European Court of Justice, which is the ECJ, in front of which we went for the People's Climate Case, and there's the European Court of Human Rights. And this case, the Portuguese children's case, climate case, has been brought in front of that court and is pleading abuse of fundamental rights. The way the case was received gives us great hope in the sense that the court granted the case priority status. So everything is happening very fast, and they added on a violation, which is degradation and torture, which is the first time this has ever happened. So we're awaiting results there. And I think, as Misha also mentioned, there's a lot happening at UN level in terms of maybe appointing a commissioner, a different commissioner than that of human rights, but one for UN human rights and climate. So I think lots of things are happening at the moment. And also in terms of litigation, the UN has just come out with a new report saying how much litigation is increasing and how much importance it has for accountability and implementation of law.
Great. So, I mean, that really shows for me the necessity for us to have this access to justice in the climate law, to give you and others the possibility to actually go in front of the court. And then also, I think it's interesting that already a court is giving such a case priority, because it understands that the climate crisis and like the fundamental rights are really inherently linked, and we have to define this relationship. And we can only define this relationship if we actually bring cases in front of the courts. But in order for that, we need to have access to justice. So that's why we need to put it into the climate law. Yeah, there are now a lot of more questions, and we did not want to make that too long here. So maybe we can go very quickly through them. So what progress has been made on the current budget? Sanctions for member states go above the set limit. Yeah, so basically we're discussing the greenhouse gas budget currently, and there's not a lot of progress, and especially there's not a lot of debate on sanctions. So that's still up in the air, but I think it's something where actually, I mean, we discussed it, there's an opening. So I really believe that there is the possibility to get something on this, and that's already great, because we have to think more in this terms of greenhouse gas budgets. as they, I mean, this is the way the atmosphere works. Which countries are pushing the council towards its position to fundamental opposition? Ask the council. I'm not sure like which countries that are, but I guess it's the usual suspects. But I really was surprised today about this kind of, you know, like the impossibility of having the debate on the most important things. So I thought, I mean, that the council has also a variety of political directions, but currently today that was a big surprise, and it's frustrating. And what kind of feedback are you expecting, or better said, wishing from our citizens and NGOs listening to you? First of all, thank you very much for listening. It's really good, and I think it's, I mean, just the story that Harriet just told. I think it's so important to know these stories and that they are happening, and to know the need, why we need to, for instance, now fight for the access to justice in the law. So if we can somehow magnify this message and you know, there's write about it, post about it, and fight for it, then it's the way to make things happen. So thank you for listening, and for also fighting for climate justice. Civil society, most particularly as youth climate organization, make pressure on the EU Council for higher climate targets during the trilogue process. I don't know, Harry, do you want to, also work on ambition? Maybe you want to, like, what can we, how can youth organizations and climate organizations better pressure the EU Council?
That's a very good question. I think that the best way forward, I mean, what are politicians looking for? They always want to get re-elected. I think that's the basis of, sorry, Michelle, the basis of a politician. So I think the best way for youth and NGOs to put pressure on the council, because the council is in the end your national governments. So I think a very good way forward is for you to write to your Secretary of State, to your Environment Minister, and to get articles published in the press, open letters, because at national level it really works as well. They'll feel the pressure, and I feel that sometimes with the climate law, it was really carried with the fact that the 2030 target was included into it, but there are so many other things that are really important in it, and I think that if your national government felt some pressure, they might feel more inclined to act. I think that would be a very good way. And obviously carry on. I mean, some of them, some youth organizations are already doing a lot of work, and it's greatly appreciated. Last year, it really helped us in terms of ramping up the ambition. And it's always appreciated. And I think also carry on your actions. I mean, obviously with the COVID, it's a little bit dampened, but those are also great.
Yeah, and I think this interesting thing is now that, I mean, there's this negotiations on the European level, and most of the time it's not really a debate on the national level. And, you know, like no one asks the minister, like, what is the position that your government is taking in this negotiation? So, you know, like invite them to an Insta Live with the Youth Council and ask them the question, like, what are your positioning on this, and that? Because they're not used to getting asked this question, because everything is done somewhere in Europe. So that's I think, yeah, very important. I don't want to stretch it for too long, even though people continue to listen. So thank you very much that you stay. The next question is, like, could there be a coalition of the willing? Well, I think the coalition of the willing, or in the European context, there's sometimes this debate about two tracks. Or you can have some kind of community procedure that, like, just some member states go in this direction. But when we talk about the climate crisis, then basically that affects a lot of laws that are for the whole of the union, like, you know, the price of CO2 emissions in the ETS, the CO2 standards in cars. So it's really difficult to go into like a two-speed Europe here. But what of course is possible, that national member states, they are more ambitious than you know what they than what they need to be on from the European side. Most of the time they are not, because they say, oh, this is Europe only demands from us to do so much, so we don't go beyond that. But of course, everyone is free to do more than they have to. And then there was like, I think it was just some comments on the climate cases. And the last one, if we don't succeed on like getting something like independent panel, is there another way we can still achieve these elements? Maybe Harriet, you can say something this, but I want to just say one thing about this. We are not yet at all in the position where we say we don't achieve these things. No, we are kind of, I mean, the fight is I mean, we are in the beginning of this. And we are, I mean, like if the council now says we don't want to like discuss this, I mean, fine, you have to discuss this, because this is a trilogue negotiation, and we will discuss it. So I think it's now important to see that that we need to actually have some pressure from all over. That it is not easy, but we're nowhere there to say yet okay, this is a lost cause. But I think actually we will achieve a lot in the climate law negotiations. I'm very certain about this. But then still there's continuous fights. For instance, Harriet, if you like see where's the next frontier for the access to justice debate?
So before going, as Misha said, going to the after the debate, I will really, really, really echo what he's just said, in the sense that it's just getting started, and we still need a lot of pressure put on the council to accept and discuss these topics that we want to bring and hear our arguments through. I think that's really important at this stage, in the sense that the trilogues that happened before Christmas, nothing actually came out of them. The real fight is actually starting now. So let's just keep that in mind, even though there are obviously other venues where we could see this possible. The best place is the climate law, in the sense that it's an overarching framework. So if you put something in there, in the climate law, it will apply to all legislation and all directives that ensue after that. And it will even possibly modify previous ones. So with that in mind, it's the best place for it. And that's probably why member states are so much against it, in the sense that they never want accountability, and even less when it comes to the environment and climate change. But another avenue for access to justice is, of course, actually trying to amend the governance regulation directly. Because these NECPs and national long-term strategies that we were talking about actually refer to the Article 10 of the governance regulation. So we could actually then work on a whole new kind of campaign of reforming or reopening the governance regulation. Now that, if member states hear that, they'll go mad. But that would be another possible venue. And then, of course, there is also, not to be forgotten, the communication of the Commission that came out at the same time as the RS regulation draft proposal before Christmas, when they themselves are talking about sectoral access to justice implementation. So this would mean including access to justice into directives that deal with environmental law. So it would be inherent to the directive as soon as it comes out. Obviously, it's a communication, which means it's non-binding for the moment. But that could be another avenue we could, of course, pursue, and for one which we would have the Commission on our side for.
Great. Now we have talked almost 15 minutes more than we're supposed to, but everyone listened, and thank you everyone for attending. Thanks a lot, Harriet, for all of these explanations. I also learned a lot, and I think you made it so perfectly clear why we need this access to justice, and also describing all of the cases that are currently there, and how this like how you basically, like, one of the problems that you face during these cases is exactly the access to justice. So yeah, that's why we need to have it. Yeah, thanks everyone. We have recorded this, and we will also put it online, so so it's there if you want to share it or want to listen again. And yeah, I wish you a wonderful evening. Hopefully the corona pandemic will be over soon, and but then we will still do this kind of course, because I think it's a very good way to give access to information to a lot of people around Europe, so they can call in to Brussels. And thanks, Harriet, and thanks everyone, and see you. And if you have other more questions, you just write to Harriet or to me an email or a tweet or Instagram or whatever you like. We are accessible to your questions, and we try to answer them.
Thanks
Thank
a lot,
you.
everybody. Bye.